this computer. All right, you're on, James.
Corinne, thank you for the introduction and thank you for the opportunity to talk with your group. And hopefully, for those that couldn't make the actual workshop, hopefully, this recording will be a valuable tool in the future. I come to you by way of New Hampshire and, in particular, New Hampshire housing. In a couple of years ago, was contracted by New Hampshire Housing to do research around um, policy and program models for accessory dwelling units. And so today I'm going to share a slide deck I put together to talk about at a high level the research I did on behalf of New Hampshire Housing. And really, I focus here a lot on things that are fairly universal. So almost all of this can apply and does apply in Vermont as well. Let's get started. So why ADUs as a housing solution? Well, there's a lot of things changing the economy right now, and housing is at an all-time low in terms of affordability. There's really inability to build sufficient housing in the current context of this low affordability, and ADUs address some of those major issues around building housing, such as the cost of land. One other thing I'd like to note about this, it's sort of the why ADUs, at least in my community, there's a health needs assessment that's conducted by our local hospital for our region. And the number one finding of that health needs assessment, and I wouldn't be surprised if this is true for your communities as well. The number one finding is that housing is a key need for better health outcomes. Basically, people are sicker and living shorter lives because they don't have adequate housing. And so that's a pretty compelling bit of information. And I would encourage you to go and check and see what the health needs assessment in your community says about housing. And the real thing I like to offer here or highlight here is that ADUs offer a lower cost alternative to traditional forms of housing, such as single family homes on subdivision lots. So, within the context of supply, when we have such low vacancy rates as we do in New Hampshire, and I assume this is very close to what exists in Vermont, um, when you have a 1% vacancy rate, it blocks choice. Basically, it delays the ability for a renter to enter into homeownership, and often it can block people out from moving into the communities where they desire to be. And so we want to try to create a healthy balance of housing stocks so that we don't create these unintended consequences on society. There's also some mismatch between housing, right? There's kind of a haves and a have-nots around housing. And so one of the things we see is that there's fewer people in households. Basically, household size has shrunk. But there's homes have more bedrooms than the households can use. So, for example, you might have a single individual living in a three-bedroom house. And so what we know is that 28% of all households are one-person households, and that 15% of homes, only 15% of homes have less than two bedrooms. So we have these large homes with just a few people living in them. And so it really ponders the question of how did we come to that place? And I don't have all the answers, but I do believe that ADUs are a good fit for helping remedy some of these things. And we could talk a little more in detail about why that is later. Another way to look at the same data point is a long-term trend. So here on the left, we have this is a line graph, and on the left, we have the year 1975. And in the year 1975, the typical household had almost three people in it, and the typical home was 1,500 square feet in size. So you fast forward, 45 years, almost now. And what we know is that homes have ballooned in size from 1,500 square feet all the way up to 2,300 square feet and some change. And that the number of people living in these much larger houses has decreased. So instead of having 3 people in the household, we have 2.5 people on average in a household. And so these trends are concerning from a sustainability perspective, from a environmental impact perspective, and from a financial liability perspective. If you have 1 or 2 people living in a house that's 2,400 square feet, what does it cost to heat and cool that house? What is the maintenance overhead that is associated with a house that's 2,400 square feet versus a house that's 1,200 square feet? And so all these things have implications for homeowners, households, and society at large. This I like to show this little matrix here. It's just I won't go through all of these, but it's just a fun little way to think about different ways that ADUs as a housing solution, accessory dwelling units as a housing solution, impact different parts of society and different stakeholders within society. So, for example, here in the top left corner, we have sort of the intersection of economic opportunity of ADUs and the owners of an ADU. And so in this box, I put additional rental revenue. You could go all the way down to the other end of governance and general society. And ADUs help grow local economies by keeping the flow of money local and within local households, and not going to large, corporate owners of say like an investment grade apartment building or something like that. Um, fun little graph. I won't go through all this, but we'll give Corinne this slide deck so people can go through this if they want to in more detail. This is a survey of survey results, just a couple data points from a survey result AARP did. So the Association of Retired Persons. This is a 2020 survey. It was for residents who are 45 years of age and older. I think this one is specific to New Hampshire, but some really telling data points here that I like to go over. The first one has to do with how many ADUs already exist in our communities, right? And surprising result here, because the answer from the survey does not reflect the data points that exist with our local municipality. So at least in the community where I live, and I've checked a couple other places in New Hampshire, and the answer has been the same. So on average, what I'm finding is that like a fraction of 1%, so like 0.3, 0.7% of all homes have an ADU, right? But this AARP survey, when they asked homeowners who are over the age of 45, do you have an ADU in your property? Could have been formal, could be informal, meaning it was never permitted. The response was 7%. So that implies that there's a significant contingent of society of homeowners in our communities who have an ADU that nobody, that the public is not aware of, or is not documented through our property system, our property tax and our assessing system. And and so this implies that there may be credibility to doing an amnesty program. And one of the case studies from my research did tackle this issue of creating an amnesty program as a way to address unpermitted or informal ADUs. Second data point here that I really like, how many residents would consider building an ADU? And almost half of all respondents said they would build an ADU, right? So that's a massive market. Of course, this survey was restricted to residents 45 years of age and older, but of that group of people, there's a huge market potential for ADUs to be serving the needs of these households, and that's a pretty big deal. The final one here, so the survey asked if residents would support making it easier for homeowners to create an ADU, and an astounding 86% of survey respondents said they would support making it easier for homeowners to build an ADU. So what that tells you is if you're in a position of political leadership you're a politician, you're trying to run on a housing platform, making it easier to build ADUs is a 100% slam dunk. No questions asked. This is an easy political win for you. It doesn't matter where you land on the spectrum of right or left. You're gonna find that if you support revising ADU legislation to make it easier to build ADUs, you're gonna get political support for that, and you're gonna get a win. So that's kind of a neat piece of information. All right. So yeah, so I've covered a little bit of why ADUs and a little bit of the data to support that. And I'm gonna summarize that research. This kind of is the foundation for why I did this research. And so I'm gonna explain to you what I see as the biggest challenge with ADUs is in our current situation around permitting and approval and just building. So the biggest one is pre-development pitfalls. And so what that is all the things that need to happen before you put a shovel in the ground and break ground to build your ADU. And so that includes permitting, approvals, financing, finding a contractor, all those things are risks to the homeowner. And so the homeowner is burdened with 100% of the initial risk of building an ADU. They have to hire the professionals, whether it's an architect or a builder engineer. They have to get the surveys. Excuse me. They have to obtain the permits, and that can be very costly. If your town or your municipality requires a planning board approval or a special permitting process that you have to notify the abutters, a homeowner could be on the hook for paying a lawyer as well. They could be looking at 20% of the total cost of the project being just being consumed by that approval process. So the big challenge with that is that hiring professionals and paying fees does not guarantee board approval of your project. They may mandate that you change your project in some way, or in certain circumstances, they might have to say no outright. And so 20% of a project budget might be 100% of a homeowner's cash that needs to go into the project. And if all that happens before you get a shovel in the ground, it's for the average homeowner, it's just too risky. It's just a hurdle that's just too high to jump, considering that the potential is to end up with something, you do all these plans, you don't get an approval, you have something of no value at the end. And so what homeowner is going to go out and spend $20,000 hiring a professional, doing all these things, and then in the end potentially not being able to build an ADU? It's just too big of a hurdle for most households. Another piece of information that holds ADUs back, and this kind of applies nationally. This is information straight out of the book Backdoor Revolution from Cole Peterson. And so these are the top three poison pills legislation or regulatory requirements that hold back the building of ADUs. And some of these things can be debated, but if we're just talking about this strictly on the pretense of can you build, do we want to increase the production of ADUs or not? These are take away all the other debate items. These three things, you know, without debate, hold back ADU production. So the first one is owner occupancy requirements. It creates complication for lenders. The deed restriction can create complications if, say, there's a foreclosure or a homeowner dies. These things can really create complication and potentially a situation where a bank has to evict a tenant out of an ADU. So there's a lot of ways to poke holes in this owner occupancy requirement from is this a social good or not? And so I understand that a lot of why the owner occupancy requirement is there is to reduce the appeal of investors scooping up homes and turning them into a profit machine, and that's understandable. And so So that, there's debate to be had there. But if you want to build ADUs, you eliminate the owner occupancy requirement. We've seen this done on the West Coast. It works. The amount of ADUs produced after this requirement was eliminated jumped significantly in Portland and places like Los Angeles. And it's really not debatable from a metric standpoint. The other one is off-street parking. Building off-street parking, especially in more sort of close-in urban neighborhoods, village centers, can be a significant hurdle for especially small size lots. You go think of any kind of community village center in Vermont where you have a village green in the middle and maybe some old houses from like 1900, 1900, 1920. And think about where you would put parking on some of these lots. And it starts to become a geometry challenge that's insurmountable in some situations. The cost alone of building a parking space could be, it's no less than $5,000 for putting down new pavement. And so there's some real hurdles there from a financial perspective too. And then finally, conditional use permit hearings. If you have to notify your butters and your butters come out and start deriding your project, your ADU project, and you have to start defending yourself with professionals in order to move ahead, you start to run into both financial challenges and political challenges that might be hard to overcome. So what are some strategies for increasing ADU production in response to these poison pills? Make attached and detached ADUs as of right. Override onerous local off-street parking requirements at the state level and eliminate owner occupancy requirements. And those things will all boost ADU production. So with all that out of the way, I want to turn now to the research that I've done. And I'm going to try to breeze through this at a fairly high level because I just want to give you a taste for what is available in the report on the New Hampshire Housing webpage and have you guys go there and explore it yourself, really. So I'm gonna talk about what the report includes. Basically, it explores policies and programs implemented in other states around accessory dwelling units, the creation of accessory dwelling units, and it gives examples of successful projects. And then the report sort of distills down these successful techniques into or these case study areas into successful tools and techniques. So basically, each one of the case studies that we looked at used multiple tools and techniques to bring about more ADU production. And so we identified all those and we sorted them, and we'll cover that a little bit later in the presentation. So the research focused on three main focus areas: affordability, pre-approved ADU plans, and design initiatives. And so we'll take a look at one example of affordability, but I'll take a second here and tell you about the three case studies. So of the three case studies, we had Barnstable, Massachusetts, which is essentially Cape Cod, and they're a very unique place because they're driven by tourism. I think their population, like quadruples in the summer, which is an astounding thing. And for Vermont, maybe that's a relatable case scenario where you have winter tourism and summer tourism, and you can have major swings in population in some of these destination places like Okemo Mountain. I love going up there 4th of July. People love to ski there in the winter. But basically, in Cape Cod, they had a loan program designed to give amnesty to informal existing units. In exchange, that unit had to be income restricted or restricted in who could rent it. So I think we'll cover that one in a little more detail in the next slide. And so the city of Boston and the state of California also had similar programs. Boston's was different because instead of focusing on income restrictions for the renter, it focused on income restrictions for the homeowner. So basically what we're showing here is that there's different ways to design the program based on what you want as an outcome. And then finally, California on a statewide level created a program to boost ADUs by tackling the pinch point of ADU challenges, which is that a pre-approval status. Getting to a point where you have an approved plan that you can put a shovel in the ground. So we'll talk a little bit about that, but that one is a especially good example, and I encourage you to check it out in the report. So let's talk about Barnstable, Mass, Cape Cod for a second. So their goal was to bring into compliance many currently unpermitted ADUs in their community. I think this was added after the fact to allow construction of affordable housing. And so the way they did this is they had a program where they offered a zero interest rate deferred loan to the homeowner and took out a second lien on the property. In return, the homeowner had to bring the ADU or any other part of their overall residence into compliance with the code. And so that was the exchange that was happening. And once the unit was brought into compliance with code, the homeowner was then obligated to rent that unit to a household making, I think it was 80% area median income, right? So it had to be for an affordable rent, an affordable unit for a resident. It was a really designed program, and a program that's been around for a long time. This is a legacy program. It's been around for 20 years, like before the term ADU existed. And so they had a lot of success with this, built over 200 ADUs in that time. The next one we'll cover at a high level is pre-approved plans. The three case studies in the report are Eugene, Oregon, Chico, California, and Seattle, Washington. And all three of them have pre-approved ADU plans that a resident of their community can walk into the planning department and say, I want to use that plan off the shelf from the city for building an ADU on my property. And so they all took a different tack at getting there. Eugene did theirs using basically created theirs using staff they had in house. They had the skill set to create these plans, and so they had a plan that was free for use by the public, and really was a virtue signal that the planning department wanted to be part of the solution for housing, and that they saw having ADU plans as a way to help homeowners sort of jump the hurdle and dive into the process of building an ADU. Chico, California was a climate refugee site after the Paradise Fire. So Chico, California is located very close to Paradise, and they had an influx of population come in after that Paradise Fire. People were moving into Chico. And so to deal with that, what was almost like a housing emergency condition, they offered up ADU plans as a way to help households carry the burden of this spike in housing demand. The way they did that was to hire an outside engineering professional to provide the ADU plans as a service to the city. And they did that in a very short timeline. I think it was like 4 months or something like that. So very different scenario, but came to the same conclusion. And then finally, the poster child for how to do this, I think, well and in a thoughtful manner and over time is Seattle, Washington. So we'll take a look at theirs on the next page here. So Seattle, Washington, understanding that the planning department is not a bastion of private market architects and professionals trying to offer the best quality service they can, the best quality plan they can for a fee. They decided to go out and partner with architects and design professionals to provide those quality ADU plans. And then instead, they took the role as intermediary between the homeowner and the architect. And they were able to leverage their power as an approving agency to control the cost of that plan that the homeowner would have to pay. So on their webpage, you can view all the plans and explore all of them and see all the details of each drawing for free. And if you want to use one of those plans, you pay a small fee comparative to the price of hiring an architect to design custom plans for you, a small fee to license those plans for use on your property, which is a really a very clever way to structure this. And one of the things we found in the report is that Chico, California, had gone back. I'm sorry, Eugene, Oregon had gone back and restructured their plan to reflect what Seattle, Washington had done in terms of structuring their program. So, pretty clever way to design things. Eugene saw that and shifted their thinking. So homeowners engage directly with the design professional through the licensing agreement. It's an opportunity for the design professional to then offer additional services like being an owner's representative during the construction phase. They know the plans, they can represent, make sure that that thing gets built to spec properly. That's a smart structure. What's really nice about this setup is the designers retain ownership of the plan sets that they make available on ADU Universe. So they're not just giving away their intellectual property for free. The result of that is that we saw far higher private market engagement in providing concepts and plans than we did in other communities. So keep in mind, this is Pacific Northwest, right? So you're seeing architecture that reflects the city of Seattle. It's very modern, very West Coast modern architecture here. So you have to imagine if we were going to do something like this in the Northeast, let's say Vermont set up a pre-approved plans solicitation process, the architects that would respond would design buildings and ADUs that reflect the context of Vermont and New England vernacular and architecture. So we'd have very different looking buildings. But all that set aside, these are very high quality plans. You can check out all of these plans in the floor plan details and elevations and all the structural load calculations. It's all there for you to view on the AD Universe webpage. And so I encourage you to check it out so you can see how this is done and done well. The Seattle's AD Universe website also has lots of really good tools to help homeowners navigate the technical process of building an ADU. Like this is a property search tool. So you can put in the address for your home and see what you need to do, if anything, to prepare for building an ADU. It also documents where ADUs already exist in your community. So a really useful resource. Finally, we'll look at design initiatives. So again, we had 3 case studies here. The city of Los Angeles has the city of Houston, Texas, and then Salt Lake City. And so all 3 of these locations develop some kind of design initiative to further the public narrative or the discourse around accessory dwelling units and their role in society. And so let's take a look at Houston, Texas here. So in Houston, and this was run by the planning department, but as we saw in some of these other ones in Los Angeles and Salt Lake, they actually ended up working with other. In Los Angeles, it was a community design organization that started the design initiative around ADUs. And in Salt Lake City, it was a partnership between the city and the American Institute of Architects to host a design competition. So the structure of these design initiatives can look very different based on the context of how they originate. And so part of the finding there is you can start anywhere with a design initiative. So in Houston, Texas, they have RISD, which is not RISD, is Rice University, and Rice University is well known for their architecture department. So Houston, Texas planning department has this web page and this public engagement entity known as what's it called? Let's Talk Houston. And so they use Let's Talk Houston as a platform to launch an accessory dwelling unit design competition. And they did this knowing that they had lots of creative architecture students that were eager to put their concepts out there for the public to consume. And this played well into getting lots of content for them to discuss. So to implement this grant and to pay for the awards, the Houston Planning Department applied for an AARP Community Challenge Grant and were awarded. And I think at this point in time, AARP Community Challenge actually has a whole segment just dedicated to design competitions for ADUs. So this is money that any community in Vermont can go after and replicate what Houston did, either through their planning department or a completely independent group. It could be a nonprofit that applies for this money and is awarded. So they held this design competition and they got really good submissions from lots of different design students and design professionals, and they put all those submissions together into an ADU design book, basically a lookbook that the planning department then made available for public consumption on their Let's Talk Houston webpage. And so this graphic here on the right is just an example of one of, I've really distilled this down to two simple graphics, but is an example of one of the ADU concepts that came out of that design competition. So worth checking out. So I think in this you'll see in the slide deck that I provide to Corinne, there's these blue text is hyperlinks. So you can just click on this to go to those locations if you want to just use that shortcut instead of going through the research report. So we did all this research. We looked at these 9 case studies, and one of the things we found was that there was kind of a universal set of tools and techniques that were deployed to help increase the production of ADUs. And so what we're looking at here is those tools sorted. I've sorted them here from sort of lowest hanging fruit, easiest to implement, to sort of the hardest, most complicated project tools and techniques to implement. And so on the left, we have technical assistance. This is really the easiest thing. Your community, your planning department can do this. They can offer workshops to help homeowners understand the ADU process. They can create documents like checklists that make it easier and demystify the process. And those things really make a difference in ADU production because they can help local homeowners overcome the fears they have around going through the process, especially if they have no experience with being their own tiny developer, so to speak. The next thing that can happen after that is, and we saw this in Chico, California, they did some really good promotional videos, public service announcements. Those things can really take a little extra effort, but they can really have a much broader reach and really boost the community discussion about ADUs. What we saw in Seattle, Washington, and a couple other communities is very detailed annual reporting on ADUs. And that annual reporting serves to inform decision makers like elected aldermen or council members around ADU policy. So if they can see clearly the metrics of and the outcomes of their ADU policy in a given year, it may really help them make future decisions in the next year or the next time something's up for regulatory change, or there's a proposal for a grant funding or something like that. So that's what we saw there. Then things start to get a little more involved and a little more labor intensive. Things like design initiatives really require someone to take a leadership role in implementing a project, right? Design competitions, pilot ADUs, construction projects. All these things require a leader. Some of these things require some upfront, upfront capital. Building in a pilot ADU, that requires pretty significant upfront capital. Although some of that might get paid back with, a home purchase or something like that. Someone paying for the ADU through debt service. But the point is that they just require a little more effort. And so you can kind of see how these get incrementally more difficult to do. Then you have the pre-approved plans. We know that having a pre-approved plans library requires maintenance, right? Because building codes change over time, right? And so the web page needs to constantly be managed as new plans come in or old plans phase out, and really acting as an intermediary between the homeowner and the design professional. And so you really need to assign a staff person to the effort of maintaining the library for pre-approved plans. And then finally, the most complicated thing is really creating a financial incentives program. And I understand Vermont has through VHIP, I think I'm saying that right, a financial incentives program for ADUs, which is great. So you guys are way ahead of the curve compared to New Hampshire on this front. And you have entities that are willing and able to take up the leadership on running those grant programs. So that's great. So another way to look at this is our list of tools on the left here. So there's 12 different tools. And across the top is our 9 case studies. And so we just identified here where different tools were deployed. And in the red X is the area of focus for that particular case study. So you'll see in the research report, we really dive deep into how these things came to fruition. And we try to cover all the aspects of how the program functions in those communities. So with all that said, I'm going to give a couple quick scenarios here and wrap up my presentation. I think I've gone quite a while here, but I'm just going to cover a couple scenarios for how communities can get the ball rolling at different levels of effort for increasing ADU production. So this first scenario here is hold a design competition. We know AARP has this community challenge grant. We know you can apply for it, and people have communities have been successful in getting funding to do a design competition around ADUs. And this really is a great way to engage in a sort of a sustained or a prolonged dialogue with the community about the role of ADUs. And you can start with a community preference survey that really could become a criteria for the design competition. And then you can put together a panel of community members, the civic leaders, industry professional leaders, real estate professionals to participate in the ranking and review of the plans that are submitted to the design competition, and then selecting winners. Once all that's in place, perhaps the town, I don't know what Vermont offers for funding around this, but maybe the municipality can apply for a capacity building grant to establish pre-approved plans library based off of a couple of the applications for the design competition. And then it really sets the stage for ADU competition winners to be contracted to prepare those plans to a stamped and ready for approval level of detail for the town to use at a future date. Scenario B here is along the same lines of thinking of the design competition, but really just focused on the pre-approved plans library. One of the things we have in New Hampshire is we have a lot of small rural communities that just don't have the technical capacity to be running a library. And so the recommendation there is the regional planning commissions could really step in and play this role of managing an ADU library on behalf of the multitude of municipalities they serve in their region. This really cuts redundant costs and is a value add service for the membership communities within their region. Kind of a way to justify membership fees. Here, the Regional Planning Commission plays the role of coordinating with local officials on the documentation needed for those pre-approved plans and maintains the online library for public consumption by residents of the given towns that participate. Oh, they're both scenario B. So scenario should say C here, zero interest deferred loans. So this gets a little more tricky, it's a little harder to implement, takes more effort. But basically by setting up, having like your state housing, affordable housing entity, I don't know I forget the name of the group, what, housing community development, maybe, um, in Vermont. The state affordable housing entity can support ADUs through some kind of loan program. Especially now with such high interest rates and homeowners not wanting to refinance out of low interest rates during COVID. A zero interest deferred loan that takes a second position on a house is a very appealing way to engage homeowners in um, in ADU production at a time when financing of any kind of home debt is difficult to stomach, especially for somebody who already has a mortgage. So the downside of doing a program like this is that it requires a lot of initial capital. Basically, the state would need to set aside a large pool of money for homeowners to tap into for these zero interest deferred loans. And different things about the loan program could be tweaked. It doesn't have to be a zero interest loan. It doesn't have to be deferred. You could do a interest only loan at a 5% interest rate. It's something that maybe the state could stomach. So different thoughts about that. Scenario D here, which is labeled C, a grant program. I understand Vermont has a program like this already, but basically funding pre-development costs. And this is all based off of Vermont, what California did. So California had $100 million in grants to subsidize the planning process, hiring of design professionals, permitting and approval for a maximum of $40,000. And that potentially was going to fund the production of 2,500 ADUs in the state of California. And so I said, well, California is a huge place, right? There's 40 million residents in the state of California. What if you scaled that down proportionally to the population of Vermont? I looked this up. I hope this is right. 700,000 people, right? If you did a proportionally sized program in Vermont, it would be $2 million and it would build 50 ADUs, and you would still have the same impact on the community, which is to say, it would jumpstart the ADU cottage industry, those working to provide the services to support ADU production. One last scenario here, bonus scenario. Consider soliciting your state to fund an ADU pilot project around mass production of ADUs. And so build some prototypes using innovative methods or materials and as a way to showcase the potential for ADUs to solve a component of the overall housing crisis. And I think Northern Border Regional Commission has a forest economy program, and they have a track record of giving out grants for innovative wood products. So, in this example here, we're looking at something called a mass timber building, and so it has very thick plywood. It's like 2 inches thick, but it's structural, and so basically it's an oversized crate and that crate includes all the essential service entities for having a dwelling unit, a place to sleep, your kitchen, your bathroom, a living area, place to eat. And basically the idea is let's test this as a model for the market. Maybe we can bring the cost of housing way down if we can get something like this to work in the market. So it's just another graphic of that. One of the notes about this is really based off of something that Hacienda CDC did in Portland, Oregon with mass timber. This pilot project was a $5 million project funded by the Oregon legislature. It resulted in a $44 million grant from the Economic Development Administration to grow their emerging market around new timber products. So potentially could be huge ramifications for chasing down some of these things and trying to implement. So. Want to give that success story. So went very long. It's 12:50, but that's my whole slide deck. And I'm gonna wrap up here and ask if Corinne, I don't know if you want to sort of be an MC for any questions that have come in.
Oh, and we already have a question. I'm just gonna read this out loud. Unless Jessica, you wanted to ask it. But I know that your camera is not working and yeah, do you want to ask it live?
Sure. Hey, Jade. Nice to meet you. So I'm asking this, I'm sort of channeling one of the teams I work with, which they're connected to Vital Community, so maybe you already have thought about this, but I think about this a lot. How can ADUs, or really any of this missing middle housing we're talking about, increase home ownership opportunities? Great to have more rentals. How can we think about these models to create more shared equity models, rent to own? Like, what have you seen in your research any way that ADU production leads to increases in home ownership rates?
I haven't done the research on that. I know that the Turner Center in California has done some research around sort of the economic implications of it. I also know that Seattle in their annual report has done a pretty good job of detailing the societal impacts of producing ADUs, especially around things like diversity, equity, equity in asset ownership, things like that. But the reality is, there's not good information about that in our market because it hasn't emerged yet really as a viable housing type. It's still in its infancy. I could think of lots of scenarios where building an ADU could help a first-time homeowner sort of subsidize the cost of home ownership. I'll give you an example of myself. The first house I bought was a two-family, and to qualify for that, I needed to include the rent from the second unit. And that turned out to be a really, really good financial decision for me personally to buy. I no longer own it, but I that house helped me enter home ownership years and years before I ever could have if it were just a single family home. I could have never afforded a single family home at the time that I bought this two family home. So I don't know how much that helps. One other scenario I think of is you have a lot of homeowners that are elderly and they're kind of trapped into homeownership because they're on a fixed budget and they've mounting maintenance requirements and they're living in way more house than they need, right? So if we can help them get over the hurdle of moving into a small ADU in their backyard, now they can use the primary home to rent to a single family home, to a small family or young family or heck any kind of family. And that revenue then becomes a way for them to sustain their lives living on a smaller footprint in the backyard of the house they've lived in for maybe decades. So that's a couple scenarios I think of.
Thanks, James. I'm just thinking about because I think that because what becomes obviously when you build an ADU, it's the homeowner that owns also the ADU, whether or not it's connected to the building. And so I guess I wonder about like if there are models where people rent to buy the ADU or for me, I'm just wondering about like, well, what happened? Like, are there other instances where like multiple people own property on a single like parcel of land that is shared in some way? And the kind of a only thing I can relate it to is you know mobile home communities or I feel like we're calling mobile homes something different and I'm blanking on it because my brain's a little fried, but you know what I'm saying? Like that becomes a really complicated space, but not something that we haven't entered before and something that Vermont has like really clear policies around. But
Yeah, I guess, I would say to that is like, how much does government want to sort of have their hand, like play a hand in the like decision making of how people structure ownership in their house, right? Like if somebody wanted to today, they could go start I'm not a financial planner. Maybe I get this wrong. They could start a revocable trust or an irrevocable trust, and there could be multiple owners of that trust. And you know, any kind of structure could exist for ownership. You could have a corporate entity owning a single family home. As far as I know, there's no rules against that, right? So like you could have 3,700 owners of an investment mechanism own 50 homes, and that already exists today. So people fear those things, and I think there's some legitimate reasons to fear those things, especially when you don't have the people living in property being the owners. But I think there's some challenges in sort of trying to dictate or incentivize who gets first right of ownership in an ADU versus, the current owner or something like that. It just feels like it might be really in the weeds, and with the potential to not go right. But I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. I honestly didn't really formulate a question there. I was just thinking about a question I received from the Upper Valley region of Vermont, and yeah, it's just something that I'm chewing on. And I do have a question, but I just want to remind folks too, if you have a question, please feel free to add it to the chat. Otherwise, you can use your raise hand feature. It's at the bottom of the screen where the reactions button is. The reactions is a smiley face with a plus sign. Or you can feel free to turn on your video and raise your hand physically. Just to say that there's many ways to ask your questions. Don't let me suck away your air. And in the meantime, Marcella, welcome. Oh, I thought you were asking a question. In the meantime, the question that I have, one of the things you brought up, James, was in terms of barriers to ADU development is the owner occupancy rule, which is something that I have heard folks kind of advocating for as a way to prevent maybe out of state to gentrification, or to really ensure that like the ADUs are serving the community that that are in need of housing. And so I wonder, do you know like, is there data out there that says that is happening, or is a potential threat?
The thing that people point to as sort of the social ill around, say, leveraging an ADU for profit is, often like tourist centric locations, like especially in New Hampshire, like ski lodges, right? And like a homeowner goes and builds an ADU, um, that they then rent on Airbnb. And people don't like the idea of an ADU as a short-term rental. And I'm going to repeat something that I heard from Cole Peterson, which I think is a really good way to think about the issue on a sort of a macro scale. And Cole's response to this is that um, you shouldn't be discriminating on a policy approach between a single family home and an ADU. So basically, if you allow outside from investors from, Utah or New York City to come in and buy single family homes in your community and turn them into investment properties and rent them on VHBO and Airbnb, then you shouldn't be having a separate policy for ADUs. You should really employ a policy across both housing types equitably and equally, because it puts an unfair burden on ADUs from a policy perspective that doesn't align with how the rest of housing is managed in the housing stock. And I think that's a really good way to think of it, right? Like you're going to create a policy that limits Airbnb rentals in your community. Make sure it applies to single family homes too. Don't put that burden on just homeowners that want to build an ADU in their backyard, um, and rent it.
Yeah, that's a really valid point. If Because then otherwise you're de-incentivizing housing density. Uh, one of the things I was thinking about, the Cape Cod example, or that's not the name of, it was like a really specific town.
Yeah.
Do you know, did their policy have anything about owner occupancy, or is Barnstable? Thanks, Jessica.
Barnstable. Yeah, yes, they do have
Constable.
that's an
Sorry.
old program. It's been around for over 25 years, and they had very specific requirements. So, um, the homeowner has to spend like 6 months and 1 day living in the primary house, and the rental must be certified. The ADU must be income certified on an annual basis. So that's how they have controls on that. The other thing they must do, and I think this is a really good policy if you think about trying to skirt around, um, well, theirs is very specific, but this is a clever way to do this because they have problems with workers in Cape Cod being displaced in the summer by rental units, tourism. What they do is require that the homeowner under that program have a 12-month lease with the renter. So the
Mm.
renter has a year-long lease no matter what. No month to month where like 3 months out of the year you're renting it to someone else and the homeowner's stuck camping. They really ensured that they were protecting those units for the renters, for the workers that were living in them. So that's a pretty good way to design it, I think. Um, Now I will note, Barnstable's ADU program is now defunct. And the reason is because they've loosened the regulations to allow homeowners to build market rate ADUs. So now any homeowner can just go and build an ADU in Barnstable and they can do what they will with it. And because that policy is passed, it's much more appealing for a homeowner to build an ADU under that program than it is to build it under this amnesty program that was initially set up 25 years ago. And all this happened in the last 2 or 3 years. So
Yeah, I'd be curious to see how that's impacting the wider community, but certainly the reason why that particular case is so appealing is that we do have housing committees working in communities that have more vacation homes than they do for folks living year round, and it's of course in a state that has a really dire housing shortage, that has, you know, resounding impacts for the community. And the other, you know, Vermont is an aging state. That's been a concern for quite some time. And so there's a lot of appealing information that you've presented to us.
yeah, another way to think of it too is let's say the market really is itching for vacation homes, right? And like rentable units. So that's going to find its way it's going to find its way one way or another, right? Whether people skirt policy, you can try to legislate your way out of it, but
very basic, but it doesn't have the
they're going to find their way into happening. The RBO is going to find their way. And politically, it'd be very hard to unwind what already exists, right? So, one thing I would put out there is, let's say you have a boom in ADU production, and all of that, let's say 40% of it is taken up by Airbnb and VRBO, right? It's going to equalize the demand market for vacation homes. And what's really nice about that is that for every one of those ADUs that's turned into an Airbnb, um, you're taking one unit of pressure off of a real home that could be housing a family or a household. And so, um, it has its merit in helping equalize demand across all kinds of demand factors, tourism, housing. I'm a big believer that we can build our way out of this if only we let enough housing units get built. This issue won't exist. So just that's kind of my big spiel here in Manchester, New Hampshire.
Thanks, James. And I just want to give an opportunity. Are there any other lingering questions that you're dying to offer to James Creston.
Yeah, hi. Are there any tax breaks, property tax breaks for the homeowner who does these ADUs? Especially here in Vermont, property taxes is huge right now. And it's tipping the scales of people not being able to afford their home that they have now. So is there any sort of tax break or even talk of a tax break if you do an ADU?
I
Because that will just
don't know
increase
how
your
much.
property.
I don't know what the tax liability in Vermont is for typical ADU. What we see in New Hampshire, which I think is a pretty similar environment, is that an ADU's tax liability is about $1,600 a year. So, that's like 1.5 months of rent, maybe less. So it doesn't end up being a huge liability. And I think from a policy perspective, if you're like trying to design policy to increase ADU production, that one's kind of a give to the homeowner that doesn't necessarily create a major incentive for more production. If you want to spend the least amount of public dollars to get the greatest amount of return on and creation of ADUs, what you do is you eliminate all the upfront fees and maybe you eliminate like the first 2 years of taxes because it's where all the risk exists for the homeowner. But after that, like second year, the homeowners kind of got it made, right? Because there's these inflationary pressures, rents are consistently going up. Costs are going up too, but in proportion, rents have risen, higher than inflation, writ large. And so, really the big opportunity there to like reduce risk for a homeowner and make a homeowner more comfortable to build an ADU is around or eliminating upfront fees and maybe just one to a few years of taxes. But to give like a permanent tax cut ultimately doesn't provide a year-over-year benefit to the public. And it has a real cost in terms of covering the cost of services to operate a municipality.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was looking for, maybe like a few years forgiveness or something. But thank you, James, you answered the question.
Well, thanks, James, for this presentation. It is, afternoon, or after 1, so I want to be cognizant of your time and oh my gosh. Sorry. And for everyone else on the call, this was recorded. I'm going to stop recording.